Hi, I'm Lisa Sorrell, and today I'm going to show you how to choose a last. We're going to use your foot tracings and your measurements and information that is available on the website for all of the last models. So we're going to choose the last that fits the foot best, not the last that has the number on it that we might think that foot needs. There are 3 bits of information on a last. One is the last model. This one is a KR3705. The KR3705 happens to be a cowboy boot last with a narrow square toe and an 1 3/4 heel. The next important information is the size, which is in this case is an 8.5. That refers to the length of the last. The number is the length of the last. And again, what we want is the last that matches the foot, and we don't necessarily care about what number it is as long as it matches the foot. The next bit of information is the letter. So this is an 8.5 C. C refers to the width. You can get last anywhere from 6A to 6E. So A's are very, very narrow. A 6A would be super narrow. An A is more common, that's narrow. And then a B, I sell last in, I typically carry them in A, B, C, D, E, and double E. That's starting with narrow and getting wider. And then on the wide end, I can special order them up to 6E, and I can special order them down to 6A. This is an 8.5 C. The C refers to the width. All right, I have a foot tracing here and the measurements. I've darkened this tracing of the right foot so you can see it. I take the person's foot tracing seated weight off. There isn't really a right or a wrong way to measure. You have to know how to use the measurements you took in the way you took them. So this explanation is going to be based on taking the measurements and the tracing seated weight off. Okay, instead of using a last, we're going to use last bottom papers. Those are available on the website. You can print them out. And you can use them just like you would use the bottom of a last. Here's a whole section of last bottom papers. Again, you can print them out and cut them out if you wish. Now you will notice that right here, I'm not all the way at the back. I'm about 1/4 inch forward. The reason for that is that both the heel, the back of the heel, and the back of the last have a curve. And when I trace around it with a pencil, see how my pencil is tracing about 1/4 inch behind where the last actually starts? And when I traced around your heel, the same thing was happening. That's the reason I'm going to set this forward here about 1/4 inch. Now what I want to do next is look at the ball. Does the ball line up? Because that's how you choose length, is heel to ball. You don't choose heel to toe, you choose heel to ball. Here's an easy way to find the ball of a last or the ball of the last bottom paper. Just put the heel against something straight, like a wall or the edge of a table, and put the ball right up there, and where they meet, right in the center of where it meets, that's where the ball is. So I'm going to do this with the last bottom paper. Okay, back to the tracing. If I put this on here the way I want, see, these are not lining up. So we know we don't want an 8. So let's try a 9. Line it up. Nope, that's a little bit long. How about if we try an 8.5? And there we go. Look at that. The ball is matching. So we know that this is a good length for this foot. And let's see how much toe room that gives us. So this is giving us about 3/4 of an inch, which is good for this toe. This is a medium round toe. So that's a good amount of toe room for a medium round. You need more toe space for a pointy toe. This space pretty much remains the same, but as you extend the toe, the last gets longer. This space is staying the same. But in order to keep this the same, see what would happen if we tried to put a narrow toe on this without extending the length. Now that we know that we want a size 8.5 last, let's begin looking at the volume chart. This is when we switch to the volume chart because this tells us the width that we want. So his ball measurement is 9 4/8. If I look at an 8.5 D, I've got 9 3/8. And if I look at on this chart, I've got a double E, so that's 9 7/8. That's too big. What's his instep? His instep is 10 1/8. So in a D, I've only got 9 7/8. So let's look at something else. If you will notice, from a B to a D in the ball, the difference is 1/2 inch. From a D to a double E in the ball is 1/2 inch. And we've skipped one width in there. There's a C between B and D, and there's an E between D and double E. So what that tells us is there's a 1/4 inch difference between widths. So if I wanted to, this chart doesn't have a E width. So if I wanted to figure out the E width, I would say an E is going to be in the ball. I'm going to take 9 5/8 and I'm going to add, 9 3/8, sorry, 9 3/8. I'm going to add a 1/4 inch, or last are always measured in 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to add 2/8 of an inch. That'd be 9 5/8. And the waist would be 8 7/8 plus 2/8 would be 9 1/8. And the instep, 9 7/8 plus 2/8 would be 10 1/8. So now I've just figured out what an E width would be. Very easy to do. On the other hand, if I need to look at lengths, see how this goes? 7 6/8 is a 4, 4.5 is 7 7/8, 5 is 8, 5.5 is 8 1/8. So the difference between half sizes is 1/8 of an inch. You can use these charts and figure out any size and width that you want just by running the numbers. They grow a 1/4 of an inch between widths and 1/8 of an inch between half sizes. Even though this chart does not have size 14 and it doesn't have quadruple E, I can still run the numbers and find what a 14 quadruple E would be quite easily. Okay, we've decided that we definitely want an 8.5 for length, and now we're looking at width. He's a 9 4/8 in the ball. If I go up to an E, I've got 9 5/8. I actually kind of like that. Once in a while, I'll give someone just a little extra width in the ball because it doesn't feel good to be squeezed at the joint of your foot. So a lot of times I'll go over that measurement by a 1/16 or sometimes even an 1/8. His instep is 10 1/8, and here we go on the E. I'm exactly at 10 1/8. So I'm going to call him for the GC 975. I'm going to say I want an 8.5 E. I figured that out just using the last bottom papers and the volume chart. Now let's do it with another last because we may get entirely different results from a different last model. Let's look at the KR3705, and we'll start out with the 8.5 C. I'm going to mark where the ball is. Is this length good? Yeah, I kind of like that length. Length looks good. Now let's look at the volume chart. So we still want to stick with 8.5 on that. Let's look at the volume chart here. Now remember, the KR3705 is a combination last, so that's going to change everything. What that means is for the KR3705, when it says C width, it's not a straight C width. It's a C width in the heel, it's a D width in the instep, and it's an E width in the ball. It's a combination of 3 different widths. So again, we're looking for an 8.5, and we're going to go over to a C, and that gives us a ball of 10, and he's 9 4/8. So now we know we want to drop down. Let's look at a C. Oh, oops, I was looking at the D. So let's look at the C. So that gives us a ball of 9 6/8 and an instep of 10. So it's a little big in the ball, but it's a little small in the instep. If I want to fit him in the ball, I would drop down to a B. That gives us 9 4/8, but the instep is only 9 6/8. So here I have to choose. Do I want to add to the ball just a tiny bit to give him that room we talked about earlier and add a whole bunch to the instep? Or do I want to go with the 9 6/8, which is quite a bit bigger than his ball, but now I've got closer to the instep. And actually, I don't like sanding on a last, so I would probably drop down to this B width and build it up a little in the ball, a tiny bit, and then I would have to build up his instep. Okay, now we're going to look at the Munson last. Totally different last here. I'm going to mark the ball. I've got an 8.5 still. And look at that. This is too long for him, and it's got too much toe length up there. Let's try a 7.5 and see where we are there. So if I line him up with a 7.5, yeah, that looks good. Now I'm putting him in a 7.5. And see, that's not very much toe space. But again, you choose last length from heel to ball. Some people have long toes, some people have short toes. So occasionally you're going to need to add to the end of the last just to accommodate someone's longer toes. It's better to do it that way than choose a last where the ball is in the wrong place just to get extra toe room. And now let's look at the Munson volume chart. Okay, let's start with the D, and we chose a 7.5, so we're going to go over to the 7.5 D. In the ball, it's 9, and his ball is 9 4/8. So we definitely know we want to go up to an E is going to give us, if the ball for a D is 9, the ball for a E would be 9 2/8, and the ball for a double E is going to be 9 4/8. We're liking that. And then we go across, the instep is 10 1/8, and the instep on for him is 10 1/8. So now we know that we want for him a Munson 7.5 double E. So did you notice what happened here? In the GC 975 last model, we wanted an 8.5 E. For the KR 3705, we went with an 8.5 B. And for the Munson, we went with a 7.5 double E. But that's because we used the foot to tell us the best fit, and we weren't necessarily distracted by numbers or letters. We want to fit the foot and not just choose a number or a letter that sounds good to us. So let's recap. You can use the last bottom papers to find the correct length for the foot. Mark where the ball is on the foot, mark where the ball is on the last bottom paper, line it up about 1/4 inch in front of the tracing to allow for the fact that both the back of the heel and the back of the last have a curve. Find the one that matches the correct length for the ball. And once you know the length that you're looking for, now you can switch to the volume charts and start looking at the measurements of the last and the measurements of the foot and you can choose the correct width. And remember, when you're looking at a volume chart, the difference between widths in the same size, the difference between widths is 2/8 of an inch. You can run this chart on out to 6 feet once you know that. The difference between half sizes in length is 1/8 of an inch. So even though this chart stops at size 12.5, I can run it out to size 18 if I want to, because now I know how the math works. It's 1/8 of an inch per half size.